Hello everybody, welcome to number 27. I'm Jack, and today we are going to be having a really interesting conversation about how much it costs to run a Ferrari. I've done one of these videos before. I did that with JM's 550. This 360 is a really interesting car. It belongs to my friend Giles. And it's interesting because it must be one of the highest mileage Ferraris I've ever come across. 173,000 miles it has on it. So, 21 years since it was first sold and all that mileage. And what we're going to do is we're going to analyse what it has cost to run in all that time. Have there been any major bills? And I can tell you already there is one gigantic bill, which is just one bill, which is close to 50,000, and we'll go through all that. Oh, the Ferrari engines from this era, they're just so pure. It feels tight, it rides really well. Now, in terms of the general condition, the interior is actually lovely, as you can see. It does not look like a car with 170,000 miles. Giles has worked on the buttons and stuff and got that sticky stuff off. The seats aren't that worn. So in that way, this Ferrari has actually survived surprisingly well. Outside, it looks pretty good too. I think the only signs where you could say, okay, this is a high mileage car, is probably when you look into the engine bay. And Giles told me he's just not interested in that anyway. He's not bothered. He likes a bit of wear, as you can see on the gear stick though. So where he needs to, he's spending money, but he's not interested in making it look absolutely pristine. Okay, are you ready to find out exactly how much it has cost to run this Ferrari 360? As I said, I'm going to break it down in two separate chunks. I'm not going to tell you every yearly service because that will just be boring. So at the end, we will sum up all the standard servicing that it's done as a separate figure. First of all, what we're going to start with is all the repair bills that have happened throughout its life. Now, interestingly, the first big bill for this 360 actually occurs 10 years after it was first sold. Why is it that there was no repair bills in that initial 10-year period? Well, it's because from 2001 to January 2009, this 360 did less than 1,000 miles a year. But from January 09 to February 11, it went from just under 10,000 miles to 55,000 miles. So in that 2-year period, from 2009 to 2011, it did 45,000 miles. So not surprising that finally the bill started to come. So the first thing is there is a clutch fault in February 2011. That is a problem with the thrust bearing, which needs to be changed, and that was done for £1,293. Then, again in May of 2011, there is a big bill, or biggish bill, of £2,600. This is on top of servicing. This is for brakes, track rod end, and a lower wishbone ball joint. If we then move on to April 2012, it had 80,000 miles, and there was a misfire. It turned out that the head was cracked, which was quite a big thing. I think it's the right-hand bank. They had to replace the whole head, and that on its own was 2,000 of that almost £6,000 bill. So there's the first biggie. At 110,000 miles in 2013, the owner had to spend £1,500 on 4 LAMBDA sensors, front and rear brake pads, and replacement headlight washers as well. In January 2014, £803 for a clutch master cylinder, a ball joint, and a shock bush. Now with 360s, people do treat the ball joints as consumables. There is an issue with the way they were produced by Ferrari, and that the anodizing, I believe it is, rubs off. When it starts to rub off, the ball joint wears really, really quickly. So a lot of people fit upgraded Hill Engineering ball joints. So there's a lot of that. Also, a shock bush changed at the same time. In July 2014, another biggish bill, which is £3,217. That's for a new clutch and a new flywheel, and that was 118,000 miles. At 128,000 miles in December 2014, £3,600, and that is lower ball joints, a heat exchanger, gearbox intercooler, which failed. So the coolant goes through the gearbox, I presume, to heat up the gearbox oil quicker. and the intercooler had failed mixing the gearbox oil with coolant. In August 2015, again another problem with the clutch, which seems to be symptomatic in this particular 360, £727, and that is hydraulic seals and the clutch housing, which had to be changed. Also, another £227 for the CAT temp control unit. We now go on to January 2016, and again, clutch loss due to clutch seals leaking, and that was just £181 to repair. This car had had sort of main dealer service history up until Giles bought it in 2018. After that, and this includes, actually no, these ones were proper main servicing, but after that it is specialist servicing. And again, in June 2016, replaced the clutch fork, and also the uprated junction box for the clutch was also changed. Now we get to the really interesting one, which I alluded to in our little drive. In December 2016, there was a bill. I said 50,000. It might be that, but here on my notes, I've put £45,009. Why could it be such a huge bill? Well, okay, this isn't Ferrari's fault, because really, the owner at the time, who I think was called Les, crashed it. I think he hit a high curb, and a lot of the right-hand side of the car was damaged, which meant that he had to replace most of the suspension, a lot of the bodywork, so lots of bits. So let me just tell you how that breaks down just in terms of parts. A steering rack, £2,000. The right-hand radiator, £1,000. Right-hand, a hub for £400. Shocks all round, including the VAT, £5,000, because obviously it was probably just one or two shocks that needed replacing, but if you're going to do one or two, you may as well do them all. The car by then already had 145,000 miles, so they needed doing anyway. Lower control arm bushers, 1,750. Steering knuckle, £700. Some of these prices are pretty eye-watering. Rear steering knuckle, 700. Tie rods, 1,000. Front wheel, 1,500. Rear wheel, 1,800. Front wing, actually not as bad as I would have thought for a Ferrari, 2,500. Front bumper, 1,500. Again, not as massive as it could have been. One of the weird ones, he damaged obviously the under trays, but not all of them, just the front part of the so two under trays, I believe. £1,500. And this is a kill killer. I don't know how, but the wiper arms were also damaged, or at least one of them was. Do you know how much it was for those? So one of them has a bit more of a mechanism on it, I believe, but the wiper arms, the right-hand one was £600. The left-hand one was a relative bargain at 150. So this crash in part, it just in parts cost £29,000. It was all covered by insurance. I know that in a way it isn't indicative because it was a crash, but this has an impact on the later spend, because many of the parts that were replaced, so the suspension was almost completely redone, all the bushers, shocks and so on. Lots of bits were replaced that would have had to be replaced later anyway. So yes, this is a massive bill, which wasn't Ferrari's fault, but I would say a decent chunk of it would have come out as maintenance later on anyway. But it is incredible to think, if you crash your Ferrari, you could have a £50,000 bill, probably even more nowadays, to be quite honest. Then we get to November 2017, still 145,000 miles, 4,800 for a clutch. Again, there's fluid loss and a gear selector bearing, so a really bit of a dodgy history with this car in terms of clutch issues. January 2018, a ball joint at £478, and I think again by this stage Giles owned it and he put a Hill Engineering ball joint on there. They're a bit more expensive, but they actually last longer than a couple of years. In April 2018, £861 because there was overheating and a coolant leak. I think we'll find out more about that in a minute. New fobs as well. No, I'm jumping. December 2018, 2,700, and this was for brakes, airflow sensor, another clutch block, and new exhaust. Now this is what I'm talking about, the overheating there in April 18. One of the issues was the rad fans, when he bought the car, although he had a PPI, they were actually seized. So the radiator fans were never working, and that explains the overheating issues, which they tried to solve in different ways. It had a coolant leak and so on. March 2019, a crank position sensor for £300. Then October 19, by then the car has 152,000 miles, is aircon had to be rebuilt, the compressor, that was £500. January 2020, passenger door lock, 352. May 2020, engine mounts and a ball joint and brake hoses, that was £600. In April 21, Giles got some new wheel bolts because he said the old ones kept rusting, so he got some titanium ones, £300, which I think is a bargain for what they were. Then in May 21, 165,000 miles, £707 for gear change cables and a new aircon pipe which was leaking. I think we're getting towards the end now. You might be relieved to hear. In June 21, this is another big one, £9,800. What does that cover? $3,800 for a new gearbox, which actually it seems possibly Giles didn't even need to do, but he's got a new gearbox on there. New clutch, so the new gearbox was $3,800 in parts, the clutch $1,318, and also HVAC ECU $400. This job also included doing the camshaft oil seals, which I know is quite labour intensive, and I think, yeah, and then also drive shaft seal on the new gearbox, which was leaking. The very last thing is, in February 2021, the accelerometer was £159 plus refilling the aircon. So the total for all the repairs that have been done to this 360 comes to, are you ready for it? £89,797. Obviously a huge part of that, 45,000, was that crash bill, but as I mentioned, a lot of those repairs would have come in anyway. It wouldn't have been that much, but it would have been close to that. It looks like no servicing whatsoever was carried out in this car in terms of maintenance, oil changes between 2013 and 2017. The reason for that is apparently, now the car was kept with Lancaster, I think the main dealer, and in that time period it seems that the owner thought it had been serviced every time he brought it in to do other ancillaries and other jobs. Whereas Lancaster said, no, the car was brought in to do certain things, which is what we did, but we never did a service as such. So there was a little bit of a gap there, but it looks like it survived regardless. Anyway, the total amount for the servicing altogether, and the service costs vary between, the cheapest was $500, most expensive major service was about 3,000 and something, 3,200 I think. Anyway, the total costs for standard routine maintenance servicing is £21,754. Now, altogether then, how much has this Ferrari 360 cost to keep for 21 years and 173,000 miles? £111,000, 551. I mean, if you take away, so that's basically 5,310 a year. I think if that crash hadn't happened, maybe that figure would be closer to sort of the 3,000 a year, which I think is what we expect for these cars. One last thing that I want to leave you with, which I found really amusing. I mean, Giles has only had this car for a few years now, but he may not care about how the engine bay looks, for example, but he is such a stickler for certain things. I saw, for example, his the sort of booklet with all the car details in it. He's put some little bits of paper in there to protect it so they don't wear when you close it together. But also, he's got a spreadsheet to show every time he has waxed the car and all the different panels that he has waxed. So he's the kind of guy I'd like to buy a car from, quite frankly. Thank you all so much for following. If you have a car that you think I should be interested in doing a video on, because it's an interesting car, or it has an interesting history, or like this one perhaps you have a full history so we can go through and see how much it's cost to run, then do please contact me. Instagram is the best way. Thank you all so much for watching. Please do subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps me, and I really look forward to seeing you for the next one.